Welcome to the Responsible Bytes podcast, everyone, the podcast where we talk about all things safe and responsible technology. I'm your host, Dr. Zena Assaad, and today I am joined by Sofia Romansky, analyst at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies and the GC REAIM project coordinator. Welcome to the podcast, Sofia.
Thank you for having me, Zena. Big fan of you and big fan of the podcast.
Likewise, you and I have known each other for about 2 years now, and it's been an absolute joy to work with you on GC REAIM. And I know I keep saying this acronym, so did you maybe want to start by explaining what this acronym is and what forum it represents?
Yeah, absolutely. So the acronym is a mouthful. It's the Global Commission on Responsible AI in the Military Domain. And this is an offshoot of the REAIM initiative, so the Responsible AI in the Military Domain initiative that was launched in 2023 by the governments of the Netherlands and South Korea with a summit in The Hague, the city that I'm sitting in. And
I
the
can
global
see it in your background. So for
Yes, it's a
anybody
great
who's
background.
listening and not watching, Sophia has this gorgeous background at the moment.
Yeah, so this is where the office of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies is located. And the Global Commission was launched after the first summit as a very much interdisciplinary initiative to try and bring the conversation, the broader conversation about what responsible AI in the military domain means and what it is further than just the conversations that were happening at the summit. And so the first summit came out with a call to action, which then prompted states to enter further negotiations and led to a second summit. And while REAIM is a kind of track 1.5 conversation happening between state representatives, but also some other stakeholders from industry, from civil society, from academia, the Global Commission was really more of a multi-stakeholder endeavor, in the sense that it brought together high-level commissioners and a group of experts to really, on this more granular level, get to the questions that were being asked at this higher level. Because I think for context, it's important to add that the broader topic of AI in the military domain as a whole is still relatively new, especially when you compare it to forums like the Group of Governmental Experts on Lethal Autonomous Weapons, which has been around for almost 10 years now.
Next year will be
Where
10 years.
Yes, there you go. And focusing on AI in the military domain means that we're looking at really all potential uses of artificial intelligence, especially things that are really emerging now only in the last few years, like decision-making support systems. And looking at how, it's not just the targeting cycle that is affected by the autonomy introduced by AI, but really every single aspect of how militaries function, from policymaking all the way down to the individual operator on the battlefield. Everything can be touched by AI because of the type of technology that this is. And so with this very easy task, the Global Commission was formed with a very broad mandate, but I think that's by design, of trying to bring the various communities together that are concerned with this nexus of security and artificial intelligence, and actually, really, try to lay it out, figure out what is responsible AI? How can we practice responsible AI, development and use? And I think that was really driven by an appetite to move beyond these conversations where it's like, well, we need norm development, I guess. We need some kind of guidelines, but it's like, who can answer these questions? Who can actually, say what the guidelines should be? And I think from the beginning, when I was put into this role as project coordinator, what really helped manage such a big project with a mandate to really shape the conversation is I imagined it as a proof of concept on small scale, right? Um, if we imagine the REAIM summit as, well, it's all state perspectives coming together, it's these cultural perspectives, it's these disciplinary perspectives coming together. What if we took one person from each of these various intersections and put them in a room together? What happens? What kind of conversations develop, and can we actually reach some form of consensus? Because if we can, that means that this should also be possible on the higher level. So bringing it back up to that highest level. And that really helped, because then I was always reminded of okay, we're all here for the same reason, and we're all bringing something very unique to the table. And I will say, as you said, it's been a busy week. There were certainly ups and downs. Like, it's not recognized enough. It's difficult to do. Um,
Well, I
but I
actually
think,
have a question on this, Sophia. So you mentioned
yeah,
that if we could bring it down to this smaller level and come to a consensus, and having been a part of the GC REAIM initiative with you for 2 years, I'm curious on your perspective of whether or not you feel that a consensus was reached and what the challenges were to actually reach a consensus. Because just for some context setting for our listeners who may not be aware, GC REAIM represents very much a multidisciplinary group of people who have varying opinions, both ethically and objectively, about the use of any technology in the military domain. So that also comes into people's opinions. So do you feel we reached a consensus?
great question. I think this taps into the core of like what's difficult about this kind of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary endeavor. So I will say this. At no point during our negotiations and or during the processes of where we had like external feedback coming in or we had internal feedback moments, at no point did I see any views as fundamentally incompatible. So
Interesting. Okay.
that is something that I worked with as a basis. I was like, all of this can be worked through. It's just a matter of finding the right language that resonates with different people. But I saw that, I always tried to look beyond what was being said by certain experts and more of what they were intending to do. Because I think that's also like REAIM as a whole, it's looking at what's underneath the issues that we really see on the surface and really tapping into like the responsibility and like the concept of responsible AI is more of an intuitive feeling than anything else. For me, at least, that's how I still see it. Like, we all kind of know what it is. It's hard to pinpoint, but that's the beauty of it in a way where everyone can find something in it. And so that's when I was listening to our many commission meetings that we had all over the world and all in all sorts of different settings. I always tried to look at like, okay, but why is this expert bringing this to the table? What's the point of this? Not just the statement that's being made, but what are they trying to advocate for? And that value base from which all of these different experts were coming from, there was nothing that I saw as like, as I said, fundamentally incompatible. There was always some common base. And also, again, as I briefly mentioned, we all agreed to join the same commission, right? We
It's
all
true.
received the same note. We all received the same mandate. And so I always remember that in the sense of, well, we're all trying to do our best to improve the situation, the knowledge, the communication, just doing it from slightly different approaches, but we're all working towards the same goal ultimately. And so that really helped, really, where I was, even if I think others in the Global Commission perhaps would disagree with me, like there were ideas that were incompatible, but I really took it first to that higher level of like, what's the intention? Um, and then really, as I started piecing this puzzle together, it really did come together in a nice way. And the thing is, consensus is difficult. I don't think true
Yeah.
consensus ever exists. But
It's more about compromise, isn't it?
yes, it's about compromise and it's about a willingness to accept that there is a point where things are good enough to make that next step.
Mm.
And I think that's exactly what the report does, where it shows that it is possible to bring all of these perspectives together, do so in a relatively comprehensive but still concise way. And then also, there are certain answers that we can all agree on. Like, since the publication, we've received quite a lot of compliments on the recommendations that we put forward.
Can you
Where,
just quickly
yeah,
state what the publication was, just in case? I will put the link to it in the show notes, but just
absolutely.
in
I
case, if
have
you
it
could
right
state what
here.
it is. Oh, it's beautiful.
It's
You have the
our
physical copy.
it's our strategic guidance report, responsible by design, strategic guidance on the risks, opportunities, and governance of artificial intelligence in the military domain. So this was the main goal of the Global Commission, so to say, is to come up with this text that put everything into one meat package as neat as it was possible. But and that's the thing. So we have recommendations that start with guiding principles. Then and these guiding principles are really like the core of kind of what I described, where it's like, what do we all really care about? We care about adherence to international law and ethical principles. We care about human agency and human dignity, and we care about designing our technologies and our institutions in ways that safeguard human agency and human dignity. Really, I think the key point of consensus, and this is true consensus that we had during all our conversations, is that humans need to remain at the center of all of this. We need to design for people. We need to keep people in mind when we are thinking about why we want to use artificial intelligence and where we use it and how to use it. And then we go down the recommendations in terms of 5 core recommendations. Again, those that shape all the recommendations that follow. This again includes an allusion to adhering to international law and ethical principles, but also, for example, a statement on the need for a legally binding agreement around the use of artificial intelligence in the decision to use nuclear weapons. This we see as a particularly dangerous, in every regard, potential overlap of technologies. So we thought that it was important to highlight this specifically. But then also the need, like emphasizing how human agency needs to be designed for throughout the entirety of the life cycle of AI capability development. And so then bringing that even further, we also have specific recommendations for the different stages of the life cycle. And this was quite strongly inspired by the IEEE SA white paper, which also took this life cycle framework and made a start on drafting questions and recommendations.
And just for our listeners, I will also link that one in the show notes as well.
Great. And but because we had so many experts who worked on that white paper, we were able to develop them even further. And then finally, we end with specific recommendations for states, for militaries, and for industry as kind of like the main actors involved in all stages of the life cycle. And really, we received compliments on these recommendations, even though at times I felt like, oh, well, this doesn't push it like quite far enough. But it already was a leap compared to anything else that was out there, because also we started at the beginning. We started by sketching the military context. What are the issues at the core of military practice? What is artificial intelligence? We tried to define it. We tried to make it as approachable as possible. And then kind of through this gradual buildup, bringing all of these disciplines together, we end up with recommendations that I feel are quite logical conclusions based on all of the things that we describe, and kind of describing the problem and setting up, well, if you want to be responsible with the way that you integrate artificial intelligence into military practice, these are the things that you should be considering. And there's no statement being made about, oh, you absolutely should do this. This is the only way to do this. Here's how you need to do it. No, not at all. The way the recommendations, the way that I tried to formulate the recommendations was so that there's still space for interpretation, because obviously every state is going to have slightly different operating procedures and rules of engagement and the way that they communicate within chains of command. But the recommendations are at such a level that it can still be adapted based on national capability and national priorities.
So can you unpack a little bit for me the statement you made earlier where you said that you didn't feel we took it far enough with the recommendations? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. I think it was finding that sweet spot. It was a matter of finding that sweet spot where we took the conversation beyond just general statements of AI needs to be governable. Well, we unpacked what governability means, right? We said, well, you need to be able to communicate about malfunctions, and you need to know who to communicate to. But we didn't make any statements about like specific tools or specific methods that could be used for this, or specific ways to set up these relations. And I felt like in a way that would have been too far, but ultimately that is the question that will be asked next, right? Is like, but how, so we understand that these things need to be set up. It's actually, like, first and foremost, this is an endeavor in change management. I think like nobody really talks about this
Absolutely.
either, but
That's such a
this
good
is change
framing.
management. This isn't
Absolutely.
governance. It's just institutional introduction of new policies and trying to make sure that everyone actually follows these policies despite like inertia of institutions. A whole other conversation, but it's an important one. But as part of that, there's going to be a lot of just sitting down and saying like, well, what's out there? What are the techniques that are available? Like, I think an example of this is while we were working on the report, let me even, oh, I opened it just to the right page. That's insane. I know this back
How
to front.
serendipitous is that?
Wow. But on page 47 of the report, we're opening our textbooks now. There's a spotlight box 8 on techniques for responsibility by design. And this was initially a way bigger part of the report where we outlined specific ways in which humans can engage with different AI systems in order to have a balance between kind of human moral decision making and AI autonomy. And this comes from like different schools of technology where it's just like, okay, but they've been working on the ethics of technology for decades, centuries, right? And so this comes from established practice. And I think this is really useful because this really points to concrete things of, well, for example, you create certain criteria where an AI system automatically diverts decision making to a human agent that it knows is there because there's a strict line of like, there is no decision to be made here. This is not something that the system is designed for. And that's kind of built in to the system. And so that used to be a bigger part of the report, but then we had to shrink it down to a spotlight box because that was kind of like a leap too far. We hadn't outlined where in the process this would come in or who would potentially be using this. But we did leave a couple of these nuggets, so to say, in the report where like, this is at least a start. But there's obviously so much more out there, and it would take a lot of work to bring it together, bring this existing practice together, evaluate what is relevant for artificial intelligence, and most likely specifically generative artificial intelligence, and what is less relevant. But that is also why our first recommendation for states is develop national policies. So don't necessarily, you don't have to be super active on the international stage. It's great. It's good to coordinate also because this issue is so international, just inherently by nature of the technology and by nature of the people involved. But the number one priority should be just knowing internally within your state, what are your practices? What are your best practices, and how are you instituting them? And so that's the next step. So that's where that comment comes from a little bit. It's not like we could have or should have done it, but there is a feeling of like, oh, I already feel the next question's coming. And so it's more of like a recognition of that appetite. Like, we didn't answer everything, and that's okay, of course, but I know what's coming next.
When I talk to my students about their research projects, I like to use the analogy of a funnel. And I tell them that you have to start at a high level and slowly make your way down to the more narrow end of the funnel. And I see the GC REAIM initiative similar to that, right? It was 2 years for the mandate. Is that correct? And in that 2 years, when you have as many people as we had involved, it's really, really hard to get to that narrow end of that funnel in that 2 years with that many interdisciplinary people and multidisciplinary people working together. So I agree with you that the report is a stepping stone and a starting point. And what I'm hoping personally that the report achieves is I'm hoping that it contributes to momentum in the right direction. Because I think for the last few years, we've had a lot of things happening and a lot of momentum, but it's felt very scattered and very disorganized, right? And so this is what I was personally hoping that the GC REAIM report would contribute to the international discourse on this topic is momentum with a strategic direction
Yes.
towards something that we're all aligned on together. But again, going back to that point of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary forums and initiatives, and even just like really this is a multidisciplinary research area, it is hard to bring everyone together on the same path because there are a lot of diverging paths that people want to take. And so can you reflect then as the project coordinator on GC REAIM, how you kind of navigated that tension of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary collaboration, which while it has its positives, absolutely also has some tensions and some challenges as well?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I think in a way, well, you'll know, but a lot of it came down to me as an individual and my ability to navigate it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, speaking very honestly, I think I was like the perfectly right person in like kind of the wrong place, but then I made it the right place. Well, because so for context, my background is not related to artificial intelligence at all. I did not study in any kind of technology course. I have a background in international relations. And I did focus a little bit on like emerging technologies, but more so the internet and like social media and how that impacts international relations. And so
Mm.
I was, in a way, tossed onto this project because I was kind of the closest person who had also an interest in exploring AI further because I recognized how much of an impact it would have. And this was right after like ChatGPT exploded and like everyone was talking about it. And I was like, oh, well, this seems like it's going to be a big thing. And so my encounter with artificial intelligence was immediately interdisciplinary. I didn't start with a particular discipline for which to look at it. I immediately started reading everything from just dry computer and data science academic articles just to understand how tokens work to like I was just like, "Oh, what is this? I need to." And I was like, "I'm not gonna read some like New York Times summary of this. No, I want like the actual academics and I want to try to understand what they're saying it in their language." To like, publications from think tanks that were already talking about the global arms race around AI and how they were framing this and how they were talking about potential for escalation and dependencies and like the role of hardware and software and talent as like the main factors that
Mm-hmm.
contribute to competition around AI. And so I think that was very much in the lead up to the formation of the Global Commission. I was doing these deep dives. And I think that gave me just enough information to then be able to deepen myself through the Global Commission in all perspectives simultaneously. So while I was learning about the ethics, I was also learning about the law. I was also learning about the military applications. I was learning about what the life cycle is. And so this gave me a very holistic and I couldn't see it in any other way but holistic understanding of AI in the military domain. And so then I think that's what really contributed to me as seeing like not really seeing that any of the arguments presented by the commissioners or the experts were incompatible because I was like, well, everyone I read has in one way or another mentioned these things, but we're all working towards making this safer and operating in a responsible way. And so, I realized that in these processes, especially kind of at this like relatively smaller scale, you need people who are willing to bridge these gaps. And you also need someone who ended up being me, who kind of drives this process and reminds everyone, like, okay, but we're all still on the same page, even though it might seem like we're on different pages and maybe even in different books. We're all on the same page, and it's actually working quite well. Like that's the thing. Like I remember this moment in when we were in Abu Dhabi. That was our fourth commission meeting, and I was getting a little frustrated with the conversation just because we were trying to put together this first cohesive draft, and we were going back to conversations that had been covered several meetings back, and I just reminded everyone, like I just turned on the mic and said, like I don't think we disagree with each other. Like, and just reminding that because I think, I fully understand. If you're invited to this kind of initiative, you have a career behind your back. You have certain priorities that you have been working towards probably for the majority of your career. And there is an interest, and I fully understand it, in making sure that your work and your values are well represented. But that often comes at this kind of like the expense of openness in communication, where there's a sense that you need to necessarily kind of fight other people for the spotlight or for the attention. But
For
I
your
think,
voice to be heard.
yes, exactly. And that's the thing, like I ended up being the person who heard everyone. Like I
You
really
were the
did.
mediator, really.
Exactly. I really understood what everyone was trying to say and where they were coming from. And so in the end, w- we did manage to have everyone's voice be represented. Like, I think every single point that has been brought up in all 5 of our commission meetings
Mhm.
is one way or another in this report. Like, I would thoroughly go through
Can
all of.
agree with that,
Yeah.
actually. I can. I
Yeah.
can agree that the report reflects a diversity of viewpoints while still fitting under the high level direction of what we were trying to achieve. And I don't think people realize how difficult of an achievement that was. It is really, really difficult to keep everyone in the same basket. Like, we did have lots of moments of diverging opinions. And exactly as you said, from an academic and research perspective, personal identity is strongly tied to the work that you put out, especially for people who work in areas like the military domain, where we talk about things like moral debates and ethical uses of technology, and international humanitarian law, where we talk about human dignity. It's really, really hard to separate the personal and the professional in those dynamics. And when I was talking before about your voice being heard, it's not just physically hearing your voice in the moment. It's, I want my voice to be resonated through this report. I want my voice to be resonated in the ideas that are in there. It's such a personal tie. And that's what makes this really, really challenging to navigate as well. And I think you did a great job at being a mediator. You were very, very patient, because I know from myself, there were definitely moments where I did not have patience, because I'm an engineer. I'm trained as an engineer, and I'm trained of, this is the outcome we want to achieve. What are the steps we need to take to achieve those? And I was sitting in a room with lawyers and philosophers and ethicists and political scientists who were like, this is the outcome we want to achieve. Let's go this super loopy doopy way to get there. And that kind of unstructured, or to me, it was unstructured, but that unstructured approach, I personally really struggled with.
Well, and you are absolutely instrumental to finishing the report off exactly because of that approach. Also, special shout out to Zena in the report acknowledgments as well, just for that contribution. But really, I think we in sometimes when we had our conversations, we were talking about keeping the human in all of these decisions and keeping the human in AI, but we kind of forgot about the human sitting next to us. And like,
The
just like,
irony.
yeah, but, it's again, the difficulty of, like, you're so focused on the subject, and the subject is so difficult and so complex. It's just so many things that need to be considered. And then, we take a break and we go get matcha in the cafe next door, right? And we have a better conversation and we come back more relaxed. And, that's equally important. Is you don't have to be, like, the most intelligent, smart person in the room. You have to also be considerate, and you have to be kind and continue. And that's, the patience came hard sometimes. Like, it really, like, I think in the final meetings,
It
it really
was.
had to, yeah, it really had to reel myself in and, like, let other people try to do the mediation, but I was still, like, really focused on getting this all down. And, like, I'd have moments when, like, throughout the process, where I would wake up at night and be like, I didn't mention this. Oh my God, like, I need to make sure that this is included, these, like, gasp moments. But, like, I think the effort has been recognized by the majority of the members in the commission. And I think it really is something that we can all be proud of, because the proof of concept that I mentioned, I think we have succeeded. We have also experienced how difficult it is, but in the end, we have succeeded. There is a good product that we have created, and that I think is, well, I'll also say this. In the final weeks of when I was working on the report, and this was, like, 40 hours per week, just, like,
Mhm.
staring at the same document, which is also just exhausting. Like, at a certain point, I said to my colleagues, like, "I can't look at this anymore. You need to do the spell
Well,
check."
you no longer see the forest for the trees at that point, honestly.
No, because I was just like, I know everything. I can't, like, if we spelled intended with, like, intented, that's how it's spelt in my book. Like, I'm not gonna change that, because that's how I'm used to it now. But, like, that was, like,
This
one of
is
the
now
last
officially
mistakes.
how the word is spelt.
Exactly. According to GC REAIM, that is the spelling. Um, but, like, those kind of things. But what really helped me was, actually, I just started thinking about the report, in a way of, well, imagine that you are a policymaker that just joined a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you're just clueless, you're fresh out of your master's, and you get sat down and somebody says, well, you're working on our AI in the military domain portfolio now. REAIM is your thing. Like, I know that this is what happens in like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, for example. And you're just like, I know nothing. I have no idea what this means. I don't know. Like, I've used ChatGPT, but that's about it. And then you're like, where do I even start? And then you're higher up.
You asked ChatGPT.
Oh, I hope not, but
Sorry, that was just too funny.
Again,
like you've only used ChatGPT and you're like, where do I start? I know, I'll ask ChatGPT.
No, oh goodness. Okay. I have strong opinions, but we can leave that as an aside for now. But what I genuinely hope is now like a higher up in that same unit will be like, well, here you go. Here's the report. Have a read. And that's like, and that's how I was thinking about it, where it's like this baby policymaker just came in and like, if you need a crash course in AI in the military domain, this is what this report does. For this, yes, arguably for this point in time, but like up until the recommendations, I think all of that is going to remain relevant for as long as this topic stays a topic of defining kind of military domain, AI, technology, and broader context of law and ethics. That's the crash course. And that really
I think it brings the scattered discourse together in one document, right? It brings differing opinions and perspectives together in one document to give, like you said, a holistic overview of where we are currently at on the conversations around AI in the military domain. I agree with you that we still need a lot more work to do, so we need to now start getting into that specificity and that granularity. But as a starting point, it's exactly what you said. It's something that we can point to or that you can give to the baby person who's just sat down at their desk and been told they now have this new mandate. And it's comprehensive in some ways and high level in other ways. And so when approaching the report and approaching the recommendations, it's important to remember that, right? You can only do so much in 2 years. And especially with the amount of people that we had, people often think that the larger the group is or the larger the people involved in the project, the more you can do. Not correct. The more people you have involved in a project, the harder it is to get things done because you get bogged down in the things that we were talking about, coordination of people, trying to balance and compromise everybody's perspective and their voices. It was a really, really hard endeavor the last 2 years to produce an output like this, given the environment that we were working in of a lot of people and a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different opinions.
Yeah, and I think at a certain point we also became very ambitious, which is good because
Yes.
I think there was like optimism about the fact like, oh, this can work. I think this was like around the November 2024 meeting in South Africa where people started to see the potential of what this could be, because that was the first time that we really had like these deep dive sessions on specific parts of the report. And also I think maybe relevant to mention, we started working with 4 work streams, and we had designed them to kind of like encourage people to go between different work streams. So we had technological foundations, we had implications for international peace, security, and stability, we had governance and regulation, and we had decision making and responsibility. So think like your tech group, your kind of politics group, your law group, and law and norms group, and your ethics group. That's basically like what they broadly were. And we really encouraged people from the Secretariat to join the group that you're comfortable with, sure, but also join other groups. And in practice, nobody really joined other groups. They really stayed stuck with what they knew, aside from a few people who really did their best to be engaged in other groups. But in when we were in South Africa, we physically put people into groups, and like I sorted them and
You
be like,
forced them. You were like, you will do other things.
you will go talk to the technologists, even though you're an international lawyer. And like having those conversations in these smaller settings, in these smaller groups, I feel like gave people a lot of inspiration, and then set a very high ambition, which was good. But also, it created an expectation that the report had to be everything at once, where like, as we said, like it's concise and comprehensive. It has to be interdisciplinary, but still sufficiently deep. And it has to be actionable. So like the recommendations have to be practical, but they also need to be normative in a way where like we're actually like, they come from a specific value base. And it is, I think, in the end, it is these things, but balancing all of this was just like this constant iterative cycle. And I think one of the most interesting parts, and this was such a like funny observation to me, like I was genuinely just sitting at my desk laughing. One of the final things that we did in the report version, I think this was actually like the final big substantive edit, was putting in a definition of responsibility. Like that's how we ended. And it's just so interesting because we were all like, we knew, again, as I mentioned, like responsibility and
Intuitively.
responsible. It was intuitive. We all kind of knew. And then we're like, dang, we don't actually have a definition.
It's in the title. Maybe we should add a definition of what
Yes,
we mean.
exactly. And it was just a moment of like, and it was, so there's the drafting committee, right? So 5 commissioners who really also directly contributed to drafting the report, and I was constantly coordinating them with them in these last like 3 months up until publication. And it was such a funny experience because it was like in the report, it's 2 definitions now, because we thought that was really important to recognize that there's responsibility that is established by law, but there's also responsibility in this intuitive sense, as we said, which is based more on like kind of ethics and morals, where it's like, well, you feel responsibility for certain things and you have certain ways of determining when you are responsible for something that are independent of the law. Like, you have loyalty, you have a sense of, well, I promised, right? Like those kind of things. And we also wanted to account for that because that's, again, bringing the human back in. It's not just about these overarching technical or legal frameworks. It's also just about how we as people react to things. And so that's how it ended up being. But getting to that phrasing that would satisfy, that we thought would satisfy as many people as possible, was just such a funny process because we were in a WhatsApp group. Like so many things just happen over WhatsApp, which is also so funny to me. Like, yes, the most professional setting.
Just a quick anecdote, because I live in Australia and most of you live in Europe, your day is my overnight. And so I would wake up to like 45 messages in WhatsApp and I was like, oh God. And I'd have to like scroll back up to kind of track the conversation.
Because it was such an international thing, it was just like this rolling cycle, right? The Australians start the day, then it goes to the Europeans, then the Americans wake up, and right when the Americans are going to sleep, the Australians are back. And it was just like constant, which worked really well actually during the drafting process, where like, I knew we had like this like moving baton of the draft that, like, I remember you were also involved with this, and then we had Ariel also looking, and we were just kind of going between the 3 of us for a few days in a row. But returning to the endeavor with defining responsibility, it was just like, back and forth like 7 times. And honestly, I felt like ChatGPT at a certain point where it's like, I understand. How about this option, which emphasizes more of the legal element? And I just sent these options back, and it's really just like, trying to stick it together because I'm like, I know there's a way to do it. We just need to find it. And we did. But it was just it was like one of the final things. And then I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. That's it. No more. But
so now that you're done and now that the report is out in the world, can you share one key takeaway you have from GC REAIM and where you hope to see it go in the future?
Yeah. So like the key takeaway is read it, if I may be so blunt. Like
read our report.
But seriously, it's a good introduction and a good refresh for anyone who's working on like a specific aspect of the very broad topic of AI in the military domain. Like, if you need just kind of like okay, yeah, that's how it fits together. Got it. Okay, now you keep going. Like that's also like the main thing that I hope to see from it. And you already mentioned this as well. Is like, now that it's there, I hope this becomes somewhat mandatory reading for anyone working on REAIM, and that we can then all enter the conversation slightly better equipped to have the conversation that we need to have, where we're not necessarily talking about definitions. We're not necessarily talking about like, oh, well, we need more norms. It's like, no. Everyone agrees, or most people agree, that this is the case. Let's talk about the practical application now. And so that's really what I hope. And we're like, we spend less time catching people up and making sure they're on the same page. We start from the same page, or at least in the same chapter, to extend the metaphor again. and
we were definitely reading different books sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. But now, like, I hope really, because be having attended like the REAIM summit in Seoul, the biggest problem was really that people just didn't have that common basis from which to work. And there wasn't really anything out there either that would give them that common basis. Because like, you have your work that you're working on and that's your focus and you only have so much time in the day and I fully understand that. And then you enter this conversation that's like on a completely different level in terms of law and you're like, "Well, I know that law exists. I cannot name any of the principles, I cannot name any of
Mm-hmm.
the conventions. How do you bring those two people into a conversation together?"
Yeah, it's a good
And
point.
so that's what and that's thinking about like the REAIM summit, right? And so I hope now for like it when the REAIM summits continue that we're gonna have an easier time talking to each other. And I hope that's the main, most basic, rudimentary impact. And I also hope genuinely for like the policymakers, so the people who are in the MODs and the MFAs of the world,
Mm-hmm.
they'll also have just that slightly deeper understanding. And, they're not just working on REAIM because it's what's assigned to them, but they genuinely try to understand and try to
Yeah.
contribute now that they have something to kind of jump off of. So that's my hope. And that's the takeaway.
I love that takeaway. And I think this is a great segue into our last question, which is the question that I ask all of my guests. And it is, what is one piece of advice that you have for people for engaging with technology safely and responsibly? So, what is your one responsible bite?
I think if I learned anything from my experience with the Global Commission and something that I'm very actively trying to practice now as well, is taking the time to reflect and just sitting with what you're doing and taking a step back and having a look at, well, why am I doing this? And why am I doing it this specific way? And this is, I think, perhaps a responsible bite, not just for the people who work with technology, but even more specifically for experts who are working in the field of AI in the military domain. Take the time to recognize that this is all incredibly convoluted and complex, and that it's, I think, appropriate to feel overwhelmed at times. But then that takes, if you recognize that and you take a step back and you ask yourself, well, what am I missing? What is making me feel overwhelmed? What's like the piece of the puzzle that I haven't quite touched yet that might help me understand this a little bit better? And then giving yourself the time to take a deep dive into something that's completely unrelated to what you're working on, maybe, but that would help your understanding of this big picture. And so taking the time to reflect and to get closer to seeing the big picture and then diving back into your specific thing, but like making that a practice and making that, part of your understanding of what it means to be responsible. Because like we as experts, we're also contributing to the conversation. We're also, directly shaping what these norms are becoming from a very bottom up way. If kind of this care and reflection and critical thinking and engagement, like genuine engagement
Hmm.
with different topics and different disciplines becomes a part of our definition of responsibility, then I think we've made leaps and big steps towards solving this and coming towards a truly more responsible relationship with AI.
That's really wonderful advice, Sophia, and a perfect place to end today's episode on. I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. You gave such a comprehensive overview of GC REAIM and the report and how we got there. And for all of our listeners, I will leave links to everything in the show notes, to the report, to the IEEE report that we mentioned, and then also to all of Sophia's social platforms so you can find her online if you need to. But thank you again. You have been incredible to speak to.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor.